The second chapter of Daniel continues the narrative of the Babylonian captivity, providing a significant historical and theological account. This chapter showcases Daniel's wisdom and his reliance on God's revelation to interpret King Nebuchadnezzar's dream, illustrating God's sovereignty over earthly kingdoms and his guidance for his faithful servants. Verse 1. In the second year of the reign of Nebuchadnezzar, Nebuchadnezzar dreamed dreams, and his spirit was troubled, and his sleep went from him. The second year of Nebuchadnezzar's reign is approximated by historians to be around 603 to 602 BC. Nebuchadnezzar's dream is the central focus of this chapter, representing a significant challenge to the wise men and astrologers of Babylon. Verse 2 to 3. Then the king commanded to call the magicians and the enchanters and the sorcerers and the Chaldeans to tell the king his dreams. So they came in and stood before the king. The king said to them, I have dreamed a dream, and my spirit is troubled to know the dream. Nebuchadnezzar's dream disturbed him greatly, and he sought the counsel of his wise men to interpret it. This was a common practice in ancient cultures, where dreams were often seen as divine messages. Verse 4. Then spoke the Chaldeans to the king in the Syrian language, O king, live forever. Tell your servants the dream, and we will show the interpretation. The wise men of the kingdom wanted Nebuchadnezzar to tell them his dream, so that they could interpret it. This would have been the normal process. The king would tell them his dream, and they would come up with an interpretation, usually one that would please the king. Verse 5. The king answered the Chaldeans, the thing is gone from me. If you don't make known to me the dream and its interpretation, you shall be cut in pieces, and your houses shall be made a dunghill. Nebuchadnezzar's demand that the wise men both interpret the dream and tell him what the dream was puts them to the test. The inability to recount the dream adds to the difficulty of the task, separating it from mere dream interpretation and into a realm of genuine supernatural insight. This put the wise men in a difficult position, as their usual methods of divination would not work without the details of the dream. Verse 6. But if you show the dream and its interpretation, you shall receive of me gifts and rewards and great honor. Therefore show me the dream and its interpretation. The promise of reward for the interpretation of the dream shows the significance that Nebuchadnezzar attached to it. He was willing to bestow great honor and gifts upon those who could provide the interpretation. Verse 7. They answered the second time and said, Let the king tell his servants the dream, and we will show the interpretation. The wise men once again requested that the king tell them the dream, highlighting their desperation and the impossibility of their task. They were not able to conjure a convincing interpretation without knowing the dream itself. Verse 8. The king answered, I know of a certainty that you would gain time, because you see the thing is gone from me. Nebuchadnezzar saw through the delay tactics of the wise men and realized they were unable to provide the interpretation. His demand that they tell him both the dream and its interpretation remained firm. Verse 9. But if you don't make known to me the dream, there is but one law for you have prepared lying and corrupt words to speak before me, until the time is changed. Therefore tell me the dream, and I shall know that you can show me its interpretation. The gravity of Nebuchadnezzar's demand is highlighted once again. The wise men had no alternative but to reveal the dream or face severe consequences. Verse 10. The Chaldeans answered before the king and said, There is not a man on the earth who can show the king's matter, because no king, lord, or ruler has asked such a thing of any magician or enchanter or Chaldean. The wise men admit their limitations and acknowledge the uniqueness of Nebuchadnezzar's demand. They were powerless to comply, and no one else in their profession could either. Verse 11. It is a rare thing that the king requires, and there is no other who can show it before the king, except the gods, whose dwelling is not with flesh. The Chaldeans finally admit that the task is beyond human ability and lies solely within the realm of the gods. This acknowledgement prepares the way for Daniel, who would attribute his insight to the one true God of Israel. Verse 12. For this cause the king was angry and very furious, and commanded to destroy all the wise men of Babylon. Nebuchadnezzar's rage reflects his desperation to understand the dream. The failure of his wise men to provide the answer put them in mortal danger. Verse 13 to 15. So the decree went forth, and the wise men were to be slain, and they sought Daniel and his companions to be slain. Then Daniel returned answer with counsel and prudence to Arioch the captain of the king's guard, who was gone forth to kill the wise men of Babylon. He answered Arioch the king's captain, "Why is the decree so urgent from the king?" Then Arioch made the thing known to Daniel. Daniel and his friends were to be killed along with the other wise men. However, Daniel's response to the situation reflects his faith and trust in God. Daniel's response to the crisis was marked by wisdom, which demonstrates his trust in God. He was calm and did not panic despite the severity of the situation. Daniel's first action in the face of the crisis was to seek understanding. He didn't react in haste, but he sought out the details of the decree. Verse 16, Daniel went in and desired of the king that he would appoint him a time, and he would show the king the interpretation. Daniel's confidence in God's ability to provide the interpretation of the dream was unshakable. He requested time, demonstrating his reliance on divine revelation rather than his own abilities. Verse 17, Then Daniel went to his house and made the thing known to Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, his companions. Daniel shared the crisis with his friends, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, highlighting the importance of community and shared faith in times of trial. Verse 18, that they would desire mercies of the God of heaven concerning this secret, that Daniel and his companions should not perish with the rest of the wise men of Babylon. Daniel and his friends turned to prayer, recognizing that only God could reveal the king's dream and its interpretation. They didn't rely on their own wisdom but sought divine intervention. Verse 19, Then was the secret revealed to Daniel in a vision of the night. Then Daniel blessed the God of heaven. God revealed the mystery of the king's dream to Daniel through a vision. Daniel acknowledged God's sovereignty and offered a prayer of thanksgiving. Verse 20, Daniel answered, Blessed be the name of God forever and ever, for wisdom and might are his. Daniel's prayer acknowledges God's power and sovereignty. It is a reminder that the source of wisdom and might comes from God alone. Verse 21 to 23. He changes the times and the seasons. He removes kings and sets up kings. He gives wisdom to the wise, and knowledge to those who have understanding. He reveals the deep and secret things. He knows what is in the darkness, and the light dwells with him. I thank you and praise you, you God of my fathers, who have given me wisdom and might, and have now made known to me what we desired of you. For you have made known to us the king's matter. Daniel's prayer underscores God's sovereignty over all earthly kingdoms. It's a declaration that God is in control of the rise and fall of nations and rulers. God is omniscient. He knows all, including the mysteries hidden in the darkness. Nothing is beyond his understanding. Daniel expresses his gratitude to God for revealing the dream to him. This further illustrates Daniel's faith and reliance on God's wisdom. Verse 24, Therefore Daniel went in to Arioch, whom the king had appointed to destroy the wise men of Babylon. He went and said thus to him, Don't destroy the wise men of Babylon. Bring me in before the king, and I will show to the king the interpretation. Daniel's calm demeanor and confidence in God's revelation led him to Arioch, the king's captain, to halt the execution of the wise men and to offer to interpret the dream for the king. Verse 25, Then Arioch brought in Daniel before the king in haste and said thus to him, I have found a man of the children of the captivity of Judah who will make known to the king the interpretation. Arioch, the king's captain, brought Daniel before Nebuchadnezzar, presenting him as the one who could interpret the dream. Verse 26, The king answered Daniel, whose name was Belteshazzar, Are you able to make known to me the dream which I have seen, and its interpretation? Nebuchadnezzar questioned Daniel about his ability to interpret the dream. It was a moment of anticipation and tension. Verse 27, Daniel answered before the king and said, The secret which the king has demanded can neither wise men, enchanters, magicians, nor soothsayers show to the king. Daniel's response to Nebuchadnezzar underlines the impossibility of the task for human wisdom. No one on earth could do what the king demanded. Verse 28, But there is a God in heaven who reveals secrets, and he has made known to King Nebuchadnezzar what shall be in the latter days. Your dream and the visions of your head on your bed are these. Daniel attributes his insight to God, making it clear that the interpretation was not from human wisdom, but divine revelation. He then proceeds to describe the dream. Verse 29. As for you, O king, your thoughts came on your bed, what should happen hereafter, and he who reveals secrets has made known to you what shall happen. Daniel reassures Nebuchadnezzar that what he dreamed and what he would now hear was about events that would happen in the future. Verse 30. But as for me, this secret is not revealed to me for any wisdom that I have more than any living, but to the intent that the interpretation may be made known to the king, and that you may know the thoughts of your heart. Daniel humbly states that the revelation is not because of his wisdom, but for the king's understanding and the glory of God. Verse 31. You, O king, saw and behold a great image. This image, which was mighty, and whose brightness was excellent, stood before you, and its aspect was awesome. Daniel begins to describe the dream Nebuchadnezzar had, which was the starting point for the interpretation. Verse 32. As for this image, its head was of fine gold, its breast and its arms of silver, its belly and its thighs of brass. Daniel describes the various parts of the image in Nebuchadnezzar's dream, each representing different kingdoms. Verse 33. Its legs of iron, its feet part of iron, and part of clay. Continuing the description of the dream, Daniel describes the different materials making up the various parts of the image. Verse 34. You saw until a stone was cut out without hands, which struck the image on its feet that were of iron and clay, and broke them in pieces. Daniel describes the climax of the dream, where a stone destroys the image. This stone represents God's kingdom, which will come to destroy the earthly kingdoms. Verse 35. Then was the iron, the clay, the brass, the silver, and the gold broken in pieces together, and became like the chaff of the summer threshing floors, and the wind carried them away, so that no place was found for them. And the stone that struck the image became a great mountain, and filled the whole earth. Daniel describes the aftermath of the stone destroying the image, symbolizing the establishment of God's kingdom that will replace all earthly kingdoms. Verse 36. This is the dream, and we will tell its interpretation before the king. Daniel now begins to interpret the dream for Nebuchadnezzar. Verse 37. You, O king, are King of kings, to whom the God of heaven has given the kingdom, the power, and the strength, and the glory. Daniel affirms Nebuchadnezzar's reign and power, but attributes it to God. Verse 38. And wherever the children of men dwell, the animals of the field and the birds of the sky, has he given into your hand, and has made you to rule over them all. You are the head of gold. Daniel explains the interpretation of the head of gold as representing Nebuchadnezzar's Babylonian empire. Verse 39. After you shall arise another kingdom inferior to you, and another third kingdom of brass, which shall bear rule over all the earth. Daniel predicts the rise of subsequent kingdoms, symbolized by the silver and brass. Theologians believe that the silver chest and arms represented the Medo-Persian Empire, which would conquer Babylon. The belly and thighs of bronze represented the Greek Empire of Alexander the Great, which would conquer the Medo-Persian Empire. Verse 40. The fourth kingdom shall be strong as iron, because iron breaks in pieces and subdues all things, and as iron that crushes all these, shall it break in pieces and crush. Daniel foretells the strength and ruthlessness of the fourth kingdom, represented by iron. This kingdom of iron represented the Roman Empire, which would conquer the Greek Empire. Verse 41. Whereas you saw the feet and toes, part of potter's clay and part of iron, it shall be a divided kingdom, but there shall be in it of the strength of the iron, because you saw the iron mixed with miry clay. Daniel describes the divided and weakened state of the final kingdom. Verse 42. As the toes of the feet were part of iron and part of clay, so the kingdom shall be partly strong and partly broken. Daniel elaborates on the divided nature of the final kingdom, with parts strong and parts weak. Verse 43. Whereas you saw the iron mixed with miry clay, they shall mingle themselves with the seed of men, but they shall not cling to one another, even as iron does not mingle with clay. Daniel further describes the nature of the final kingdom, indicating that it will be a mixture of strength and weakness. The feet of clay represented the final kingdom, which would be divided and fragile. Verse 44. In the days of those kings shall the God of heaven set up a kingdom which shall never be destroyed, nor shall its sovereignty be left to another people, but it shall break in pieces and consume all these kingdoms, and it shall stand forever. Daniel prophesies the establishment of God's eternal kingdom, which will supplant all earthly kingdoms. Verse 45. Because you saw that a stone was cut out of the mountain without hands, and that it broke in pieces the iron, the brass, the clay, the silver, and the gold, the great God has made known to the king what shall happen hereafter. And the dream is certain, and its interpretation sure. Daniel concludes the interpretation, affirming that God has revealed to Nebuchadnezzar what will happen in the future. Verse 46. Then the king Nebuchadnezzar fell on his face and worshipped Daniel, and commanded that they should offer an offering and sweet odors to him. Nebuchadnezzar recognized the power and wisdom of Daniel, but more importantly, the power and wisdom of Daniel's God. Verse 47. The king answered to Daniel and said, Of a truth your God is the God of gods and the Lord of kings, and a revealer of secrets, seeing you have been able to reveal this secret. Nebuchadnezzar acknowledges the God of Daniel as the supreme God, above all others, and recognizes Daniel's God as the true revealer of mysteries. Verse 48. Then the king made Daniel great, and gave him many great gifts, and made him to rule over the whole province of Babylon, and to be chief governor over all the wise men of Babylon. Nebuchadnezzar rewarded Daniel for his wisdom and service, making him ruler over the whole province of Babylon and chief governor over all the wise men of Babylon. Verse 49. Daniel requested of the king, and he appointed Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego over the affairs of the province of Babylon. But Daniel was in the gate of the king. Daniel's companions, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, were also promoted by Nebuchadnezzar at Daniel's request. Daniel continued to serve in the king's court, demonstrating the power and favor of the one true God. The second chapter of Daniel provides a remarkable account of God's intervention through the prophet Daniel. It showcases Daniel's wisdom, humility, and his unwavering faith in God, emphasizing God's sovereignty over earthly kingdoms. Nebuchadnezzar's dream, interpreted by Daniel, not only foretells the future of various kingdoms, but also reveals God's eternal kingdom. As we reflect on this chapter, we're invited to ponder the lessons it holds for us today. It's a reminder that God is the revealer of mysteries, the one who holds the future in his hands. Let us learn from Daniel's example, remaining faithful and trusting in God's wisdom and sovereignty. Don't forget to like, share, and leave a comment below with your thoughts on this powerful chapter. Your engagement helps us grow and reach more people with the message of God's Word.